Welcome to Humanity in Deep Space, an initiative involving a planetary conversation surrounding the range of interconnected issues and hard challenges, ranging from science to health to food, design, economics, governance, space and planetary ethics, etc., that must be addressed as our species continues the transition to deep space. This is episode 14, The Moon Incorporated, an important conversation about the next phase of lunar exploration and mining, including the technological and economic opportunities, as well as the threats posed by all of this. Today's guests are Richard Boling, Vice President of the Redwire and Space Manufacturing and Operations Business Unit. A veteran of nearly 25 years at the company, Boling leads business development efforts for the company's in-space servicing, assembly, and manufacturing, as well as its biotechnology and materials science research and manufacturing portfolio. Redwire's catalog of commercially operated in-space research and manufacturing equipment is among the most comprehensive in the industry, if not the largest. Its payloads have flown aboard parabolic flight aircraft, suborbital rockets, space shuttles, commercial crewed and uncrewed space station visiting vehicles, and the International Space Station, where 10 Redwire payloads currently reside. Stephen Lugauer, an associate professor in the University of Kentucky Department of Economics. His current research concerns the economics of exploring outer space and sustainable economic growth in the very long run. His past research focused on macroeconomics and demographics. He's published work on these topics in the Economic Journal, the American Economic Journal, Macroeconomics, the Review of Economics and Statistics, and the Journal of Money, Credit, and Banking. And George Sowers, who has 30 years of experience in the space transportation field during a continuous span working for Martin Marietta, Lockheed Martin, and the United Launch Alliance, including a stint as the chief systems engineer for the Atlas V development. Sowers helped develop more than a dozen launch systems. He recently retired from his position as vice president and chief scientist at ULA, where his team developed an architecture for fully reusable in-space stages fueled by propellant that is mined, refined, and distributed in space. Our moderator is Kris, founder of Humanity in Deep Space and co-founder of Space Tango. Prior to this, he organized and led a variety of entrepreneurial ventures.
Hello, my name is Kris with Humanity in Deep Space. I'd like to welcome all of you to this webcast dealing with, we call it Moon Inc. and some of the commercial research and related activities, including lunar mining, as we transition and continue to establish a presence on the moon beyond just kind of R&D, but for working and perhaps settling. I want to also thank our sponsors, which make this all possible. Space 629, Kentucky Science Technology Corporation, NASA's Solar System Exploration Institute, SSERVI, National Stem Cell Foundation, the START program at the University of Kentucky, STEM program, Media Collaboratory, Space Tango, Baird Financial, Shelgren Center, Higher Orbits, the Interstellar Foundation, Visit Lex, and 22 Solutions. And again, thank all of you for your support and ongoing support of Humanity in Deep Space. For those of you who don't know, Humanity in Deep Space is really a conversation and discussion to explore a number of the issues that we deal with, not beyond just the technology, but the interface between humans and technology, and how do we maintain our humanity and our humanness as we actually transcend and go out of low Earth orbit into deeper space like the moon and then on to Mars. And we deal with a lot of those various issues. All of our webcasts are recorded. You can go on our YouTube site and catch any of the last ones that we've done over the past couple of years. So having said that, welcome to everybody again. And I'd like to introduce our panel and ask each of them to introduce themselves and then say a little bit about themselves and how they got to this point in their career. So I'll start with you, Rich Boling.
Thanks, Kris. I'm Rich Boling, Vice President for Corporate Advancement here at Redwire. Prior to Redwire acquired TechShot Incorporated about 2 years ago, and altogether now between Redwire and TechShot, I've been here about 23 years. And Redwire is really all about being dedicated to accelerating humanity's expansion into space by delivering reliable, economical, and sustainable infrastructure for future generations. Something I think we'll get into a little bit more about what that means, at least it relates to the moon. So thanks for the invite.
Yeah. Thanks, Rich. George?
Yeah, hi, I'm George Sowers. I'm a professor at the Colorado School of Mines, supporting the world's first and only graduate program in space resources. I've been at Mines about 7 years now. Before that, I had 30 years in big aerospace with Martin Marietta, Lockheed Martin, and United Launch Alliance. When I retired from ULA in 2017, I was the chief scientist and had spent a fair amount of time, working on refueling options and where to find propellant in space, because that really is a game changer. We'll talk more about that, I assume. And so at Mines, my research has been focused on developing propellant sources, including the water resources at the poles of the moon.
Okay, thank you. And Steve?
Hey, Kris, thanks, first of all, for organizing this talk here. My name's Steve Lugauer. I'm in the Department of Economics at the University of Kentucky in the Gatton College of Business and Economics. And I think compared to the other two panelists and to you, Kris, I'm relatively new to doing research in space. My background is really as a macroeconomist and thinking about things like population aging and the demographics of the population. But I've recently become very interested in space, and in fact, taught a class in the business school here to undergraduates on the emerging space industry, and just kind of gotten into it in part because of that. And the interest in this from sort of the next generation is so high. It leaves me optimistic about a lot of these things that I think we'll get into today.
Thank you. And again, to the audience, please feel free to post any questions via the web chat, and we'll try to get to those as soon as we can. So let me just start with the general question. So we talk about, there's obviously been a lot of talk recently about the moon through Artemis and other projects going on. NASA's certainly been spending a lot of money providing research grants and other kinds of grants to companies, et cetera. In terms of kind of, in your sense, where are we right now relative to all of this? Who wants to go first? George?
Sure. And just for full disclosure purposes, and since you mentioned Artemis, I am on NASA's advisory council overseeing those programs, so I do have some unique insight. But to me, it's a pretty exciting time in space. I think things are moving. They never move as fast as enthusiasts like me would like, but things are moving in the right direction. The Artemis program is going forward. They've had some successes. Clearly, we have big commercial players in the business these days, which is a little bit of a change, namely SpaceX that everybody knows and Blue Origin that everybody knows. So I think there's a lot of momentum building. There's a lot of momentum building to establishing permanent presence on the moon. So we're going back to the moon, and this time for sustainable reasons. NASA is going to lead the way as a sovereign nation, but hopefully, the commercial companies will be able to leverage what NASA is doing, and we can establish viable businesses on the moon and in cislunar space.
Rich, you have any thoughts?
Yeah.
I know you guys are heavily involved in all of this.
We are, having started my career in this period of transition between shuttle and station. Now I'm seeing sort of that same sort of inflection point now as we're looking past the ISS program into more deep space initiatives, having serious conversations about infrastructure on the moon and even what has implications for exploration around Mars. And some of that activity is we are connecting with Redwire supplied 11 of the 13 cameras that are on board the Orion capsule on the Artemis 1 mission. used for navigation, used for vehicle inspection, and even these great images looking back on the moon and on Earth. So for private industry to have a connection with this great new program is exciting for us. And then on the surface of the moon itself, when we get into Artemis 3, 4, 5, and so forth, right now we have a contract through a NASA program called Tipping Point that essentially is a way of paving the moon, which sounds like an amazing thing to think about. But the issues that the early Apollo program had, or all the Apollo missions had, with lunar regolith, and how every little piece of lunar regolith is like a shard of glass that can damage spacesuit joints, and it gets kicked up and kind of hangs statically above the surface. And so our project called Mason literally will make landing pads in advance of vehicles, visiting vehicles, and even road beds, and enabling research and exploration much further than before for the rovers that come next. So these are real contracts being awarded now. We're seeing activity with that. People here that that are on our team actually doing things destined for the moon, which is exciting to think about, that this is really happening. So it's a great time to be. These are the golden ages. This is the golden age of spaceflight, I think.
Okay. Steve, you any thoughts on this?
Yeah, Kris, I was trying to think about this when thinking about this talk, kind of where are we and now, and where might we be going? And these are obviously broad ideas, but I was like, there's kind of 3 stages. Stage 1 is what we're doing right now, and that's getting there, getting to the moon and establishing that presence. And we're going to do it. It seems like the momentum is there to do it, and that alone has a lot of economic opportunities in it. And then stage 2 is, okay, now what are we going to do once we're there? Let's figure it out. And we've already started stage 2. Companies are already thinking about this. Companies like Redwire are definitely thinking about this. What are we going to do once we're there? But that stage 2 is ongoing and will be ongoing for a while. What is going to be profitable? What is going to be worthwhile doing on the moon? That's stage 2, figuring that out. And stage 3 might be a ways off, but then that's when you might think kind of all access. Now we can start doing everything and anything that we've discovered that is worth doing on the moon.
Okay, so let's get into a little bit, few more specifics. Beyond beyond the point of, okay, we're going to put some humans on, and initially, obviously, return to the moon with humans, and I'm sure those be for relatively short stays. But then we're going to move beyond that. And so when we talk about actually going to the moon, working there, having some sort of settlement, even if it's a research settlement or construction settlement or whatever, what's going to have to happen? What is that going to look like? And why are we doing it? What are the applications? What are the uses that have got people excited here, other than we're going to the moon and going to look for rocks and things of that nature, which are obviously important as well?
I can start again.
Okay.
So I think one of the first steps to happen, and it's happening, will be a shift in the paradigm for spaceflight from the sort of one-offs that we're doing today to a refueling economy in space. Every satellite that's been launched in geosynchronous orbit its life is over when it runs out of fuel, and it can't be refueled. Same is true for every upper stage that we've launched into space. But we know that refueling changes everything. It changes the economics in Earth orbit. And it really changes the economics in space flight to and from the moon, or anywhere else in the solar system for that matter. I've spent my career in the rocket business, and we fight the tyranny of the rocket equation, we call it. And that's this exponential increase in propellant required to do, delta V. And refueling absolutely takes that exponential increase and linearizes it. Just to throw out a few numbers, if we can develop propellant on the surface of the moon from water ice at the poles, then we can lower the cost to get from Earth to the lunar surface by a factor of 3, just by refueling one time en route. The cost to get back from the surface of the moon to the Earth can be reduced by a couple of orders of magnitude. A factor of 70 is the number I like to use. So those are pretty game-changing type numbers. And so the first step is basically changing the paradigm so that as we're developing new satellites, we design them to be refuelable. And that's happening now. You know, the big Lockheed, Boeing, Maxar, all the big primes for satellites are starting to make that shift. We're starting to see companies that whose business model is to provide propellant in geosynchronous orbit, which is where I think it's going to begin, because there's an economic return right away. A local Colorado company called Orbit Fab is doing that. There are others, Astroscale and others are doing that. So refueling paradigm is happening. You noticed in the second award for the human lander that went to Blue Origin, they are planning refueling as part of that, and Lockheed is going to be providing the tanker vehicles for that. So once that happens, the next step is, okay, where do I find fuel in space? Because once you find it in space, you don't have to launch it from Earth. And launching propellant from Earth is the reason that Saturn and SLS are so enormous and so expensive, is they're mostly propellant. Mostly what we're launching into space right now is propellant. So to me, that's step one.
Yeah, Rich, anything you want to add to that before I have another question on this topic?
Well, I'm excited to think forward those many years to what other industry we might think about that we want to do. I know folks like Jeff Bezos have talked about he wants to move heavy industry off the Earth, but I think it's going to be a good while until we're not the industry is not surrounding a federal customer. You think about a South Pole research base and all the infrastructure that needs to go in and needs to support that. I think it could be 10 years or so, in my view, perhaps, that really before those sort of spin-off additional profit-making entities really get a toehold. There's a lot of work to be done just to get this infrastructure, this ambitious infrastructure set up that we need, that industry
Right.
need, and other things that we're doing sort of in that regard is providing solutions for power sources, power distribution on the surface of the moon, things that are needed, even outfitting some of these bases in vehicles. I have to talk about our lunar loo. I've got the cosmic toilet paper right here. Redwire is developing its own, commode system. So some of that infrastructure that we talk about, I think, is going to be employed over the next decade to really help set the stage for what comes next. And perhaps it is mining hydrogen and oxygen from the South Pole to create those fuel depots. Yeah. Right now, we're focused on trying to get that infrastructure in place.
So is the cosmic toilet paper, is that available on the market now, for maybe be one of the first products, right?
Hey,
for the commercial market.
Part of our new marketing team.
I think, in these early stages, the basic science funded by governments are going to lead the way, and governments have their own incentives to do that. Could be to support science. It could be for national prestige or interest. I know, Kris, you had Alexander McDonald on your webinars before, and he's has this great book kind of showing that's always been an incentive to go to space. Kind of the signaling of, hey, our way of doing things is so good that we can send people to space. And I think those motives will still be there before the profit motive is. But I just think it's amazing that now we're talking like, within 10 years, we might start to see some of those profit motives be realistic. And maybe it'll be 10 years, maybe it'll be 20. But I think 10 years ago, we would have said, well, I hope in my lifetime or in my children's lifetime. And that's just dramatically changed.
Okay. Well, let me go back. So when we talk about fuel and fuel depots and things like that, pit stops in a sense. So where's that fuel going to come from? What's the process?
So I've done a lot of research on this, and it's reasonably straightforward. One of the great discoveries of planetary science in the last few decades is that water's ubiquitous in the inner solar system. It's on the poles of Mercury. It's very abundant on Mars. It's chemically bound into the most common types of asteroids, including, I think, the samples that just came back from OSIRIS-REx. But most importantly, it's in these permanently shadowed regions near the poles of the moon. And we verified that with hard data back in 2009 when we crashed one of my Centaur upper stages into the Cabeus crater near the south pole of the moon, and directly measured over 5% water ice by mass. There's been a lot of debate about exactly how much water is really there, and there's skeptics and there are people that are bullish about it and people that are skeptical about it.
Mm-hmm.
One of the first things that needs to happen, and I think this is NASA can play a role in this, is some missions into these PSRs, permanently shadowed regions, to get some ground truth and see what's under the subsurface, map out some of these ice deposits, see how big they really are. But if the remote sensing indications are as we think they are, then there's enough water ice there to have industrial scale production of hydrogen and oxygen. And so basically you extract the ice from the lunar regolith. It's in the form of ice grains mixed in with the regolith grains. And so you just need to heat it up and sublimate it and collect the vapor. And then, the process to electrolyze it is pretty straightforward. And again, there's been some NASA contracts. Mine's participated with a company called Oxyon in a different tipping point contract that actually just wrapped up last summer to do a lab scale electrolysis system. We tested it in our cryogenic vacuum chamber and proved that works just fine. It's based on the same technology that's currently operating on Mars as part of the MOXIE experiment. So the industrial processes to produce hydrogen and oxygen from water are not exotic. I mean, okay. They are operating at industrial scale on Earth today.
So let me ask go a little bit deeper than that. Clint Collins, who's one of our big supporters, and actually Clint was on one of the astronauts on the last Blue Origin flight. So he's very active in these communities. Has asked, he's really interested in this particular topic. So what kind of, Rich, I'll ask you, what kind of infrastructure are we talking about? I mean, it's to actually do something like this on any kind of scale.
Right. Well, like you go onto any building site and you've got to you'll see the hard hat behind me. We're working on a new building for our place, and the bulldozers come in first and they do the site prep. So our solution there is the Mason project that I mentioned. We're not building the rover. We're partnering with others with rovers and literally doing earth moving with blades, compactors, and then the regolith centering using microwaves. I saw there was the question in the chat about building roads and landing pads with 3D printing, and our solution is really centering with microwaves. So technologies for the site prep, and then power and power distribution. I know there's a lot of talk and some funding being spent and things explored on nuclear solutions in terms of power on the moon. Redwire has vertical solar arrays. We have a bunch of rollout solar arrays on the ISS right now, and some versions of those can be used on the moon to generate power, and then power distribution is another really important thing too. Just like you have a field full of windmills out there, and then you got to get that power, whether it's offshore or from the mountains down to where it's needed. And power distribution is just as important we've got solutions in that regard too. In terms of encampments, things like that, I know Blue Origin and is thinking a lot about that. Others are thinking a lot about, well, what does human habitation look like there? And we've certainly done a ton of thinking on something that I think, George, you were kind of getting at earlier. NASA puts it in terms of go, land, live, explore, right? And we've done a lot of thinking on that land and live piece of it, working toward the explore. So I think it's, Kris, you talked about humanity, and wherever you go, there you are, in a sense. And I think we're going to bring some of those solutions that we employ here on Earth and austere environments on the moon. That's certainly what Redwire is focused on doing.
Right. I mean, to ask something, and I think Steve will chime in. I mean, there's a couple of questions that have come up, really talking about, really, questioning, is there really any kind of short-term commercial possibility here? And I don't know what short-term or long-term means, I think. But one question specifically was, well, who's going to be in the intermediate term, the customer for lunar propellant? It's going to be NASA? Is it going to be the government? Are we really looking realistically, are we really looking, and there's nothing wrong with this, a lot of new technologies start this way, really looking at the government primarily being the prime customer for a fairly long time? Steve?
So
Yeah, I could
go
jump
ahead,
in.
Steve.
Sure.
ahead,
Yeah. To rephrase, I guess, a little bit in econ speaking, where's the profits going to come
Right.
from? I think Rich and George make it fairly clear that the technology is there or almost there. There's a lot of technology that's ready to be deployed. The question is it profitable to do so at this point? And I think you kind of gave the answer. At this point, it has to be the government as a customer at first. Otherwise, it's simply too risky for individual companies to bet that the demand will come from some other source other than federal governments at this point in time. Now, maybe that'll change relatively quickly once we're there, but it's hard for a company, I'm guessing, like a Redwire, to say, hey, we're going to invest in millions, billions worth of research on a technology unless we have some sort of sense that at this point the federal government will make use of it in the near term.
Yeah. George, you were going to say something?
Yeah, no, I think that's right. I think the initial customers are the government. I've had lots of conversations with NASA in particular about their needs for propellant, and they do have needs. Whether just going to the moon or coming back. Like I said, NASA's picked Blue Origin to be the second provider of the human landing system, in addition to SpaceX. And Blue Origin is gonna need fuel. Right at the beginning, they're going to ship it from Earth, but once it's available in space, it should be a lot cheaper to buy the space source propellant. Back in 2016, as chief scientist at United Launch Alliance, I actually made a public offer to buy propellant in space, and even provided a price. Here's what I would be willing to pay. Then that was predicated on refueling the launch vehicle going from Earth to geosynchronous orbit, launching as standard, commercial ComSat. That, if the price is below this certain threshold and you can refuel one time, then you can actually lower the overall cost to do a launch to geosynchronous orbit. So the economics are actually there right now. You can make money. There are hurdles. I mentioned one of them earlier, which is everybody's got to design their vehicles to be refueled. That's kind of the first step. And SpaceX has taken that step with Starship. It is explicitly designed to be refueled. Blue Origin is taking that step with their human landing system. And so, we're on the way. And, once you have the capability to be refueled, then there will be an economics incentive to refuel. And once propellants are available, sourced in space, if they're cheaper than those that are launched from Earth, then there'll be an economic incentive to buy those.
So we talk about not just refueling on the moon, but in the process of going to the moon, this notion of a cislunar kind of economy between the Earth and the moon. So are we talking about some sort of platform in between where you would potentially do some of this refueling? Because what I hear you saying, I think, is that all of it wouldn't necessarily be on the moon.
So there have been a number of architectures developed. To me, the one that makes the most sense is it's tanker vehicles that get dispatched from a centralized storage hub like a depot, ideally located in EML1 or a halo orbit and Earth Moon Lagrange point 1. And then tankers would be dispatched because the optimum place to refuel depends on where the ascending vehicle is going. And it also depends on exactly, the mass fraction and delta V splits of that particular vehicle. So it's the model is more like refueling F-18s on a long sortie from a C-130 tanker. The tanker meets the mission where the mission wants to be met, and you refuel en route like that.
Okay. Rich, are you guys? What's Redwire doing in this particular area? Is it mostly surface stuff, or are you also looking at other kinds of things?
Well, we're also providing components to the habitation and logistics outpost, so that the gateway payload module, which is after supplying equipment for the ISS. Where it operates under the magnetosphere, right? And the requirements of operating in cislunar orbit are far more stringent on things like electronics and lifespan and things they have to endure. So it's been exciting and challenging to develop a whole new set of tools and electronics to operate for a very long time in that kind of environment. And I think it's exciting to do that work, but it's also a glimpse into what I think a lot of our work is going to be, and all the harsh requirements we're going to have for the things that we're going to put on the moon, for the things we're going to put maybe in a Martian transport vehicle, or even on the surface of Mars. Tech development is a huge part of why we're doing all this anyway, right? If we can do it on the moon, if we can reduce things to practice here, then maybe we can translate some of those technologies to Mars. Which is what we're doing on board the Halo module now. Okay.
Steve, anything you want to add to this?
Well, I think what Rich is talking about is just critical for this, that we'll have to have some infrastructure in place to do things on the moon and do things on Mars. Then the transport costs become very important and critical. And if they're profitable, that makes sense. Of course, if we have nothing to do on the moon or the Mars or on Mars, then the transport costs are a little less important in themselves. We need a reason to go, and I think there will be those reasons. I mean, I'm optimistic that there's going to be a lot of reasons around that.
Other than initial early R&D and verification and proof of concept and things. I mean, what kind of info? I mean, we talk about info. What's the size and mass of these things we're talking about? I mean, are we, talking about, what are we talking about? Something that's, fairly automated and fairly small, or does it have to be much bigger? If we're actually talking about refueling on the moon and having the infrastructure around that.
So I've done some mass estimates of sort of like the initial industrial scale production plant for propellant on the moon, and it's less than 30 tons, maybe 25 to 30 tons, metric tons. So you can land it with landers that are currently being planned. Just to point on the infrastructure, we need infrastructure, but the cost of that infrastructure will be dramatically lowered if we do the propellant first.
Okay.
Or early. The earlier we do the propellant, the earlier we reap the cost benefits of not having to launch fuel into space. And I just wanted to address, there's a question in the chat that says, we got lots of water on
Yeah, I
Earth,
saw
so why
that.
do we need to go to the moon to get it? It's because if you're launching from Earth, then absolutely you're not going to bring, water back from the moon. But if you're on the moon, the cost to get water from Earth to the moon and turn it into propellant, if that's where you need it, is exorbitant. And so, if you wanted to put a commercial payload on an astrobotic, CLPS lander, commercial lander today, their website price is, I think, $1.2 million a kilogram.
Right.
So that's kind of the cost of moving mass to the surface of the moon, at least from a commercial price.
Okay.
So any water that you can get on the moon for less than $1 million a kilogram is going to pay off.
An example, a NASA price for 1 kilogram to go to low Earth orbit is about 40,000, 30 to 40,000. Now that's not returning, right? That's a one-way trip. So you see that there's a large magnitudes of difference between getting something to 500 kilometers up and to getting it landed on the surface of the moon.
Rich, how that might change with private launch companies, whether it's Blue Origin or SpaceX or whatever.
Yeah, I think a lot of people are looking at Starship as a way to bring launch costs down. We're all excited to, I think all of us cheer each one of these folks on and believe that this is essential. I look at, talk about what can you do on the moon right now to make money? Go get some of it and bring it back and sell it. Right. That's what I've been advised to do.
Right.
Is there are a lot of people that would love to study some regolith. So just go down, land, scoop some up, and bring it back. And you think about it, it's precious. Now, if you did that a lot, so you're willing to pay a lot to get that first little bit. The more and more you do it, are people willing to pay less and less because there's you have a lot of it. It's not rare anymore. And I've thought about this, that maybe the business model, that's fine if the technology continues to advance and it gets cheaper and cheaper and cheaper to launch that rocket.
Right.
And then it still makes sense to go scoop up regolith, even though people are willing to pay less. We're all counting on some version of Moore's Law, I think, to continue on sort of these launch vehicles.
Let me ask you to guesstimate whether it's you or Stephen or George, just to guesstimate. So when we talk about 40,000, and so by a factor of what might we reduce this down to? I mean, realistically, with some of the either private sector things or innovations in technology, whatever. I mean, what are we talking about?
Well, I spent much of my career selling rockets, and we always talk about dollars per kilogram. The gross dollars per kilogram if you're launching a satellite to low Earth orbit is, even today it's roughly 3,000 a kilogram.
Mm-hmm.
On something like a Falcon Heavy, maybe it's even a bit less than that, maybe 2,000 a kilogram.
Okay.
It goes up exponentially as you get higher and higher. So it's about a factor of 4 times LEO to do geosynchronous orbit. And then, a factor of 10 or so to do lunar surface. So everybody benefits from lower costs, right? Lower transportation costs. It lowers the barrier of entry for every business plan, right? Because that is a significant element of cost for anything that you do in space right now.
So let me ask a question too. There's always this ongoing conversation between humans and robots. It certainly has happened, certainly going on with Mars. Of course, I always tell people that, as far as I'm concerned, we're already on Mars. I mean, we have very sophisticated, automated, smart systems, robots, which are simply an extension of us as humans. So, how much do you think to accomplish some of the things we're talking about? How much do you think we would need to do with humans or robots? What would the combination be? I assume it would be both. But are a lot of things we're talking about, potentially could be predominantly fully automized? Rich?
Yeah, I think a lot of it could be. I think there are perhaps some reasons that we choose to put humans in the loop is for reasons beyond technical performance. As we were talking about earlier, Stephen was talking about signaling value, and that's an incredibly powerful signaling value to say that your nation has done that. And a lot of people are kind of getting excited about what could be if China, for example, puts boots on Mars before us. And yes, we lead the world in putting robots on Mars, but it gets us to a whole other level of interest, and we hear that another nation is going to put their sovereign astronauts on Mars. So, Kris, I think what can be done one versus the other. I'm sure George has got some good data on this too. I think you can do an awful lot with robots, although Harrison Schmitt, I think, has said that having him personally on the moon as a geologist allowed him to do a lot more than maybe we could have done without him. But I think for me personally, the goal is to have humans in the loop, whether that's for higher yield with a higher science return or Elon's goals of being a multi-planet species. Just for me personally, that's my ambition.
Other thoughts?
Yeah, just kind of to build on what George was saying earlier, the idea kind of, if you build it, they will come. If we can get those costs low enough, then it opens up opportunities for lots of activities. And it's hard to guess what those activities will be. There'll be smart people figuring out ways to take advantage of those lower costs. And some of those might involve robots, but we can imagine some that would be, focused on people. Rich mentioned the signaling. That's definitely a powerful one that I think will come up first. But obviously, people have thought about tourism, which is definitely going to be people. Maybe there's some types of science that is better accomplished by boots on the ground. And we haven't even talked about military applications or an existential threat.
Right.
Let's have a colony on the moon just in case, or on Mars just in case. And those things might also kind of be really people focused. So I think they'll be part of the equation.
Yeah, I don't think, we've thought about doing a webcast just on that topic, because I think it's one of those, 900-pound gorillas, the whole militarization, defense, aggression aspect of it. Certainly from, we all know, particularly from recent events, we haven't figured it out on Earth. And there's certainly no reason, I believe those people said, no reason to believe that we're going to figure it out somewhere else off the planet, at least right now. Hopefully we will, but I think that's certainly a big issue. So a little bit about the interface between humans and technology. So as we go do some of these things, I think we all agree that humans are going to be required, at least in the early stages, if not longer, to achieve some of these things. So we start talking about interface and the technology. Obviously, keeping, Rich, you mentioned to it, one of the things Humanity Deep Space talks about is obviously keeping humans not just surviving, but they have to thrive. I mean, they're going to be working. They're going to be doing a lot of things on the surface. And it's not enough just to say, oh, well, this is how many calories they need. And, we'll feed them granola for every day and all these kinds of things. So in terms of that, how do we, kind of where are we in that? And in keeping that, just imagining, because there's no right answer. How long do we think an initial crew would be up there? I mean, let's say that we start the process and humans are going up and they're doing work. I mean, how long? What would you estimate that initially we would talk about? Because there's still, as there's still big questions. Even though people say we have experience on ISS, there's still big questions of exposure to deep space, and this is certainly deeper space than the ISS. I mean, yeah. But just in terms of what are we talking about here?
Yeah, well, I feel like George has probably got some good numbers on that, but I want to kind of weigh in a little bit about, like you said, the not just surviving but thriving.
Right.
And there was a question earlier about 3D printing on the moon, and I know there's some thing people are looking at 3D printing habitats to get away from the radiation environment there. And so back to the go, land, live, explore. What we've seen on station is for one thing, the value of growing your own food. With the greenhouses, we manage the advanced plant habitat on board the station. right now we're building our own greenhouse. It'll be the only non-government owned greenhouse in space. And we obviously want to provide that to habitats on the moon as well. So just the benefit of tending a garden, planting a seed, tending a garden, watering it, caring for it, eating a fresh carrot, or fresh chili pepper, which we've grown in station before on station. Those sorts of things. I talk about being happy, healthy, productive, and safe, entertained even. And it seems maybe not essential, but I'm interested in things that keep the crew connected with Earth, with their family, technologies that keep their humanity intact when they're living in this whirring, sterile environment, 240,000 miles from home at a minimum. And as those are things that Redwire is also doing. The greenhouse is one that's coming up. So we had a question about that over in the chat.
With the hemp. Yeah.
Yeah. And, Kris, you may know this too, but some of the biggest groups, the most interested groups in growing plants in our greenhouse in space are hemp and cannabis growers. So this person with a question, if you want to connect with me after this, we're already working on some of that, and I would love to talk to you about growing some hemp on board the station, and who knows, maybe later. But George, I'm just curious, you've got a ton of experience and decades of experience with this. And what do you think the durations are for what we can expect on some of the earlier missions, and how long can we live on the moon?
Well, I mean, I think NASA's plans for Artemis are, weeks of duration initially, but then, hopefully we can extend it to indefinite stays, right? But there are a lot of challenges and things we don't know. I mean, the moon is in deep space, and therefore it doesn't have the benefit of Earth's magnetic field or atmosphere to shield the from radiation. You have both solar wind and the galactic cosmic rays. So, people living on the moon for long periods of time are going to be dug in. I think the numbers, I may be off a little bit, but I think to get the same level of radiation protection that you have on Earth, on the moon, you need 3 or 4 meters of regolith between you and deep space. So you're going to be kind of underground, and then there'll have to be protocols that limit exposure, for surface sorties and things of that nature. We'll need to be able to predict space weather, solar flares, so that people can take shelter in those events. I think all those challenges are solvable. I also think the topic of agriculture in space is really fascinating. It's one of my hobbies on Earth is to garden, and I know how hard I had to work to get just the right garden soil, and the right mix of microbes and fungi and other critters and worms and, you name it. We had one of our students actually was able to get earthworms to live in regolith, but he had to amend the soil quite a bit. Just dry regolith, the earthworms, just recoiled in horror from, because it is sharp and, they don't like it. But you put a fair amount of organic material, mulch or, manure or whatever in there, and even earthworms can live in the regolith. So, there's a lot of work that's happening in all those areas. They're all fascinating. But the proof is in the doing.
There's questions
got to get up there and start doing it.
How much gravity is enough? We know that 0G, if the astronauts didn't work out vigorously, they would lose up to 2% of their bone mass every month. With that vigorous exercise, they can maintain the strength, but internally inside the bone structure, it's sort of being remodeled, even with the way they've been able to overall maintain their bone health. It's a big issue, and we don't know, is 1/3 G or 1/6 G, is this enough to be healthy? We have 2 sets of centrifuges on the station now, and we've done research with fruit flies and worms coming up, and even cement at fractional gravity, solidifying cement at lunar gravity. And, is that ratio of cement to aggregate going to be different in a 1/6 environment than it is in a 1G environment?
Right.
So we don't even know yet exactly just even from a gravity perspective, what the long-term countermeasures may need to be.
Yeah, and I think that I know we did Humanity in Deep Space. We did a webcast about a year and a half ago called "Are We Really Built for Deep Space?" and had a number of people, including Ting Wu, who heads up the space genetics lab at Harvard, and her actually George Church as well, and Kris Mason, who was one of the lead physicians on the twin study. And they're now, we're not talking about, I mean, I think the moon is a little bit different, but they all had serious doubts as whether humans are actually built currently for deep intrusions into space for lengths of time without some sort of genetic manipulation or engineering. Of course, that's speculation. So I think it does get back to I think the question of, well, so since we're just talking about the moon right now, how long is long enough? I mean, I did see something the other day, an article where somebody had written that based on physiological research coming on ISS, that anybody that's been, I think, on station or at least 9 to 12 months, that they do not recommend they go back for another several years because of some of the physiological and neurological issues that have emerged. So that's obviously going to be an issue. And so George and Steve, if we're in the initial stages, if we're saying a couple of weeks, so what's the cost of getting those people up and getting them back? If we figure we've got to be doing that, let's say initially once a month with people. I mean, is that prohibitive or?
Well, if you're using SLS and Orion based on current prices, that would not be affordable.
Okay.
I mean, just using NASA's own numbers, right?
Yeah, I get it.
Look at their budget numbers. But hopefully Starship gets up and running. Hopefully New Glenn gets up and running. Hopefully ULA's new Vulcan rocket gets up and running. We've got three rockets that are within, a year or two, 3 brand new generations of rockets are within a year or two of being fielded. And hopefully, those things result in, downward pressure on prices and with robust competition, that'll keep going. So we talked about that earlier. Then you incorporate new technologies like reuse that both New Glenn and Starship have built in, as well as refueling, then those new technologies actually do help you get some of those quanta of cost price reduction.
Okay. Let me so what basically using NASA's own, just for edification purposes, using NASA's own numbers, what we'll be talking about, given use some of the same technology for up and back? And assuming you have to be some sort of, obviously, vehicle to get them off the planet as well.
Well, I mean, a single NASA Artemis mission to the surface of the moon is a couple of billion right now, I think.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I don't know the exact numbers, but it's in that order of magnitude, single digit billions. So clearly we can't afford lots of those per year. I mean, the price would go down just by rate if we increase the rate. One of the reasons it's so expensive is that they're one every other year or one every third year in the current planning. But again, I think that those price reductions are not going to come from the government side. They're going to come from the private sector. And, we have 3 new generations of rockets that are on the cusp of being fielded right now.
We have a couple. Go ahead. I'm sorry. We have a couple of questions, which we always get on these. Is the whole question of the debate between sending humans and sending robots, not just for basically economic reasons also, but the whole issue of because we can do it, does that mean we should do it? So there's several questions on here. They're talking about the human aspect of the cost and benefit, at least in the early stages.
Well, there's no doubt that the costs are higher if you send people, right? Because of the issues that have already been raised. But look, in my mind, and this is the way NASA is going. Nothing beats that image of having people on the moon or on their way to Mars, for spurring innovation in this sector, which is and has already been happening, reducing the cost, by having more smart people think about these things. And so, from my point of view right now, that trumps the cost reduction of sending robots versus people. And
Right.
And so it's maybe more my opinion, but I think that's what a lot of people think.
Yeah, I mean, humans are inherently explorers. I mean, that's what we've been doing since the dawn of humanity, is dispersing ourselves around the planet. And to me, it's just an extension of that, to dispersing throughout the solar system and eventually beyond that even. Yeah, one of the questions in the chat was, well, aren't we going to ruin the moon if we develop it for resources? And talking about the ecology. Well, there is no life on the moon. That's been well established. It's dead. It's a rock. But to me, the idea of developing the moon for resources is the first step in developing the solar system for resources. And the resources just in the inner solar system are nearly infinite compared to what's available on Earth. And so, to the extent that developing resources in space offsets the need to extract those same resources on Earth, we actually benefit Earth by using space instead. And Earth is the one place we know has ecology and life, and it's very precious and unique as far as we can tell. And to me, it's definitely a better trade-off to utilize resources in space to end scarcity than develop the same quantity of resources on Earth.
Yeah. Okay. We just about running. I have a couple of things. I want to make one statement, not a question, but I think it's obviously, I think everybody would agree. Obviously, with so many different groups, companies, organizations involved on these, one thing is going to be, I think we all agree, it's going to be really critical, and hopefully people are thinking about this, is interoperability of all this stuff. I mean, all these different companies are going to have to develop systems that somehow operates synchronously in some way. But the few last few minutes, I just want to talk a little bit about, because we're talking about commercial and we're talking about all these kinds of things. Again, no answer, but we did do a webcast, actually a live, that we put on the web back in the spring on space law. And a lot of the discussion, we had two people on there. One was Ken Newman from NASA, and Jim Dunstan, who's a space law guy from way back. And a lot of discussion, and it was talking about the moon and talking about, okay, well, is it first come, first serve in terms of somebody gets to one of these craters that we find out has a lot of water and, raw material for fuel. I mean, how are we going to, I know there's a lot of people say, well, we have treaties and those kinds of things, but I'm not sure how relevant those are going to be when push comes to shove. So I just wanted to throw that out. And how are we going to manage all that stuff from the legals? Because with commercial, it's got to, there's going to be legal structures too.
Yeah. So we've had an older act or some legislation. Somebody will think the name of it, back in the 60s and 70s, but the new version of that now is called the Artemis Accords.
Right.
Something that my boss Mike Gold was instrumental in developing when he was at NASA, about interoperability, about norms of behavior, uses of the moon, and I think we're in a new era that requires new thinking about that. And I think the Artemis Accords, 20 some odd nations have signed on to it now, and that's starting to become.
Am I mistaken that U.S. has not signed them?
No, I think they were the first.
We started it.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, we started it. India was one of the most recent signatories to the Artemis Accords. India, who has just put a lander on the South Pole, which is great. I think we all are not saying that it's Earth or Moon, right? I mean, we want the Earth to be well preserved, and I think George's comments are great that we want to preserve the Earth in a pristine fashion and not destroy the Earth, and looking for resources if we can bring those in. And most funding is spent really from a federal government perspective, or even maybe even with a NASA perspective, on improving life on Earth and preserving Earth.
Right.
NASA's budget is less than 0.5% of the federal budget, and the most it's ever been was something like maybe 4% in the 60s. And that less than 0.5% that NASA gets, a tiny fraction of that, frankly, is related to Artemis and moon and exploration and whatever. A lot of it is looking back at the Earth and providing data about where we live right now and how to, from an ecological perspective. So I think we're still spending most of our resources on taking care of this planet right here first.
Yeah. Steve, obviously economics is, intertwined with law. And it's key, obviously. I mean, I think at the webcast we did, it was Jim Dunstan maybe mentioned that there's one particular crater where they think there may be an abundant source of water, and there's one way in and one way out. And so, it's like, is it, whoever gets there first. So what are your, in terms of commercial viability, it seems like that's something we've got to work out.
Yeah, I think it's fair to say that space law is a work in progress, and that most companies would like to know the rules, because that's uncertainty for them if they don't know whether they'll be able to keep the profits that they generate in some sense.
Right.
If they go to a mine, if they go to an asteroid and build a mine, will they be able to benefit from that? They want to know the rules before they start making their investments. So I think the development of those space laws are important, and kind of related to that is the idea of how we're going to manage these, what will hopefully become a greater number of launches,
Right.
and how that's going to be dealt with, both because of the environmental impact back on Earth and for the potential space debris around the Earth. Those are all things that I think will come up.
And these laws, as we said, these laws have to be planetary laws. Because this is a planetary issue and a planetary problem or challenge.
The U.S. took an important step back in 2015 with the passage of the Commercial Space Act, which, among other things, did establish property rights for materials extracted from space objects. And so that's a really important first step. And then Luxembourg has followed suit with similar legislation. So if you're a U.S. entity and you go up to space, you extract stuff, you can own it. So property rights are kind of a really first important step to having economic activity. You have to be able to own things to be able to buy and sell them, right? So, and then a few other countries have followed suit. I think the UAE and Japan and Artemis Accords talk about it, but they're not as explicit. And they're definitely big gaping holes. Like nobody knows how to make a mining claim on the moon.
Right.
There are no rules on that right now. So.
Well, we're out of time. This has been a really interesting discussion. Thank everybody for the questions. Final thoughts, Steve? Steve, a big question. Have they ever had, one of the things Clint asked me to ask you was about modeling. Is there anybody, what about modeling some of the economically modeling? So has there been anybody that's really taken a serious step at that?
Well, I think, you've had Matt Weinzierl from Harvard on here before, and there's a few other economists looking at space, but there's very few. So the answer is there's very little economic research, at least kind of theoretical research.
Your final thoughts?
And yeah, my final thoughts is just that, I think this conversation has just made me even more excited about the possibilities here in the very near future.
Good. George?
I'll just repeat what I said at the beginning. It's an exciting time to be in this field. A lot of progress is being made, and I think we're close to a tipping point where the momentum can't be stopped.
Right. Okay. Rich?
Circle back to what I said earlier. I mean, I think that this is the golden age. There's never been so many ways to launch, so many places to go, not only with the ISS, the moon, Mars really becoming a real thing, commercial space stations being developed. And to take a page from Walt Disney, I would say there's a great, big, beautiful tomorrow. And
Okay.
it's exciting to be a part of this era.
Well, thank you all so much. This has been great. Again, thanks to from our viewers for your great questions. Again, thanks to all of our sponsors, which I got to earlier. I urge all of you to check out our website at humanityindeepspace.com and look forward to our next webcast, which will probably be in several months. And we do post on our website, and anybody who's on our mailing list, which means if you've registered, you're on our distribution list, occasional updates on what's going on in the field and interesting articles. So again, thank you all so much.
Thanks.
Goodbye.
Thank you for joining us for Humanity in Deep Space. Our continued exploration of space is accompanied by profound questions, responsibilities, and obligations. What is our place and ultimate responsibility to the larger universe? And how do we maintain a sense of humanity as we leave the planet Earth? These questions and more are discussed in our videos, as well as other curated content at www.humanityindeepspace.com or on YouTube by joining Humanity in Deep Space. The music for this episode was written and performed by Danny Grandstaff and is available at dannygrandstaff.bandcamp.com.